So welcome to Module 4 here on our personality chapter. And what we're going to go ahead and do this time is focus on the various clusters like we were talking about at the end of Module 3. And this particular module is going to focus on Cluster A, which are the personality disorders of paranoid, schizoid, and schizotypal. So what we're going to focus on first is the paranoid personality. And the reason that they cluster this under cluster A are what used to be called schizophrenia spectrum disorders. What you're going to see here in the three disorders are people who appear kind of odd or eccentric. You're also going to see a close association with schizophrenia, which is why they had previously kind of called this schizophrenia spectrum disorders. So we're going to go ahead and start with the paranoid personality disorder. What you can see here is that they tend to have a inappropriate suspiciousness of others' motives. So if you ever say to people, like, stop being so paranoid, this may be the type of disorder you're referring to. They can take very extraordinary precautions to avoid harm. They can be overly reactive to minor slights or insults. So these are people that are going to be kind of always on guard and always suspicious of others. And of course, when you start asking people and not trusting them for their motivations, what you do is create what they call a self-fulfilling prophecy. A self-fulfilling prophecy is basically when you expect something to happen, it's more likely to happen. So if I think that you're always cheating me and you're going to be suspicious of me, then if I do that enough, people are going to start being more suspicious of you along the way. So it's kind of something that the behavior generates more suspicion, making the person then more paranoid. Because the people's behaviors just really annoy other people, and they maybe get more cautious. And because somebody's cautious around you, then the paranoid person's going to think, oh, they're up to something. And so that's what we generally see. Now, with every one of these disorders that we're going to go through that are categorical in both clusters A, B, and C, I have a nice little easy way of remembering some of the symptoms. Now, you don't need to memorize these by any means, but I thought they were helpful, and so we're going to have those in addition. Some of them are going to be redundant from the slide previous, but I do think this will be helpful for these mnemonics for paranoid personality disorder. So you can see that the acronym there spells, or the mnemonic spells, suspect. So S is for spouses cheating or suspected. U, unforgiving or bearing grudges. S, being suspicious of others. P, perceiving attacks and reacting quickly. E, enemy in everyone, suspects, associates, and friends. C, confiding in others feared. And T, threats seen in very benign events. And so this all gets into some of that suspiciousness and not trusting anyone that is really key to the paranoid personality disorder. And you can see in the cartoon there, you say you don't trust people, but right now you're trusting me not to stab you with this ball pen. Good, now she's calm. So this kind of just reiterates. Now, the next slide are a series of slides that I've been showing throughout the semester that just tries to give an overview of paranoid personality disorder. You can see about possible biological influences, though we really didn't explore that much. Your book goes into a little more detail if you're curious. You can see the social cultural influences, unique experiences that they may have that have heightened their fear of others. Parents teaching if they're always talking about not trusting others or other people are out to get you. And then, of course, you can see some of the psychological influences. And then we'll talk more about treatments in general. But as you might imagine, if you're suspicious of everybody, and the cornerstone of most therapeutic approaches are to trust people, you can see where it's not going to go very far with this particular personality type. So now we're going to go ahead and transition to the second type in the cluster A, and that is the schizoid personality disorder. As you can see here, the diagnosis, it's really a pervasive pattern of indifference to others. So you can see in this graphic, the individual in the white is apart from all those in gray. And in this case, there's a diminished range of emotional experiences and expressions. So they're just really kind of flat affect. They like being apart. They don't really care about other people so much. Or it's not that they hate them, it's just they're indifferent to them. And so you can see this in the schizoid personality. As far as the mnemonic for this particular one, it says solitary is the mnemonic, and S is for showing emotional coldness. This is not showing warmth. O, omitting close relationships, rarely having many friends. L, lacks close friends or confidants. I, involved in solitary activities. T, takes pleasure in few activities. A, appears indifferent to praise or criticism. R, restricted interest in sexual experience. And Y, yanks himself from social relationships. It all goes down to just this kind of social isolation and emotional flatness overall. And as far as the overall trends, you can see the biological influence. They may think there's a little bit about autism, but this is just a possibility. Certainly matches a lot of the characteristics that we'll talk about when we get to autism later in the semester. Social cultural influences kind of goes to the symptoms there that we just went over. And the psychological influences is just really not a lot of emotional lability. In other words, they don't show a whole range. Social skills training is probably going to be the most effective treatment for these type of individuals. And our last type of the cluster A is the schizotypal personality disorder. And here you can see peculiar patterns of behavior rather than on emotional restriction and social withdrawal that we see in schizoid, but kind of different. A lot of these peculiar behaviors are going to take the form of perceptual or cognitive disturbances. They're not psychotic, okay, and that's important. They're not out of touch with reality. And this one's probably the most genetically related to schizophrenia of the three different in cluster A. And they oftentimes will meet a lot of the criteria for additional disorders. So the symptoms really are these kind of manifestations of what people think might be eventual schizophrenia. And a lot of the family members of people who are schizophrenic are going to show signs of the schizotypal personality disorder. So there may be some sort of genetic link to this in this particular disorder. Now, as far as the mnemonic for this, you can see it says me peculiar. So it's just showing kind of odd, unique individuals like you see in the photo up there. So M, magical thinking that influences behavior. They may have some superstitions or paranormal kind of beliefs. E, eccentric behavior or appearance. You can see like with those individuals that certainly would make. P for paranoid ideation, so that gets into a little bit of the paranoid personality disorder characteristics. E, experiencing unusual perceptions. C, constricted affect. Constricted by mean they lack a range of emotion. So you can see where there's some overlap between paranoid and schizotypal personality disorders. Unusual thinking and speech. L, lacking friends. I, ideas of reference. A, anxiety, like social anxiety, and R, ruling out psychotic disorders or pervasive developmental disorder. So the R part of it is really getting into some of the overlap of comorbidity that we oftentimes see. Now, your book spends a lot more time on schizotypal. I think what your book tried to do is try to highlight at least one cluster personality disorder and go into a little more depth and then just kind of cursory acknowledgement of some of the others. And so schizotypal was the one they chose from cluster A. And so they go into a little bit more detail about the treatment. However, with schizotypal, it's just really hard for them to try to figure it out because a lot of them don't seek or remain in treatment. And then you got your comorbidity issue, so you don't know if what you're treating them is effective in one part of their comorbidity versus the actual schizotypal personality disorder. And frankly, most treatment for a lot of these personality disorders have the same issues as far as not really clear on effective treatments because of the high dropout rates, and many of them, because remember, the underlying overall was that these people with personality disorders don't really think they have a problem, that they're not really abnormal. Antipsychotic medications or things like antidepressants can have some benefits, but there's not a whole lot of controlled studies where we would assign one treatment to one person and then not to another, maybe providing a placebo to try to show that it's effective. So here's the overview of the schizotypal personality disorder. Once again, the biological influence, they think maybe with schizophrenia, possibly. Social cultural, once again, you're seeing some of those lack of social skills and a lot of social anxiety, so that they prefer maybe more to be alone. And then the psychological influence is really this kind of odd, different type of behavior, peculiar behavior patterns, not necessarily out of touch of reality, but just kind of a different bird of a different feather in regards to that. So that's going to wrap up cluster A of the personality disorders. We'll start in module 5 talking about cluster B, more specifically on antisocial personality disorder. So go ahead and tune in for module 5 next.